Governments around the world seem to have taken advantage of the ongoing pandemic to make major power grabs, some even explicitly using the coronavirus as a reason to consolidate authority. In Belarus, the longtime president, Alexander Lukashenko, often called Europe's last dictator, won his 6th consecutive term, claiming he'd got 80% of the vote. His opponent has been forced to flee the country after she called for a recount, citing widespread voter fraud. Mass protests have erupted and authorities have responded with violence, resulting in at least 2 deaths and thousands of arrests. The EU has stated that it does not recognize the election, but Belarus maintains close ties to Russia, and Vladimir Putin has offered assistance to Lukashenko in the wake of the unrest.
Clearly what's happening in Belarus is related to, I think, an authoritarian drift in many places of the world.
Lukashenko didn't use COVID-19 to grab power. In fact, he was notoriously dismissive of the coronavirus pandemic, and that's part of the anger directed towards him now.
He behaves in the same way as Turkmenistan president, as Kim Jong-un, who also denied the danger and the threat of the virus.
But it highlights an important trend. In times of crisis comes opportunity for both democracy and despots. Authoritarian drift happens when a country's democratic foundations, such as free speech, fair elections, independent judiciary, and strong civil rights, are eroded. Here are a few examples from around the world to keep an eye on. In Hungary over the past decade, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's political party has quietly bought up most of the country's media companies, and in March took over the country's most widely read online newspaper. It was previously an independent check on the government, but a close ally of Orbán recently purchased a controlling share in the company and in July fired its editor-in-chief, prompting dozens of reporters to quit in protest. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, one of the country's most prominent entrepreneurs and newsmen, Jimmy Lau, was arrested along with his 2 sons and several of his company's executives. The charge? Suspicion of colluding with foreign forces, an offence which did not exist until a new national security law was forced upon Hong Kong by China in July. The outbreak of coronavirus in the Philippines has been one of the worst in Asia, and its president, Rodrigo Duterte, has used the lockdowns as an opportunity to pass a sweeping anti-terror law, greatly expanding the definition of terrorism, which rights groups worry could be applied to actions such as protests or criticism of the government. And in Brazil, as total deaths from COVID pass 100,000, the country's president, Jair Bolsonaro, has repeatedly clashed with the nation's Supreme Court, which has investigated him and his family. In May, Bolsonaro joined a rally against the Supreme Court, and he has claimed that he has the backing of the military to resist the court's absurd orders. Authoritarian drift has been a factor worldwide for years, but the pandemic seems to be accelerating it. Political scientists are questioning whether the handling of coronavirus could expose the weakness of democracy in comparison to the unchecked power of an authoritarian state.
I mean, on the one hand, one has to worry about the information you're getting from an authoritarian state. At the same time, there's also reason to believe that an authoritarian state might have more means at its disposal to put policies in place that are highly unpopular but much needed. Social distancing and wearing a mask will be effective, and that's not that popular in democracies.
This wouldn't be the first time a disease had a drastic impact on politics.
You could go back through history and you can look at great political shifts and see how pandemics or diseases affected political outcomes. Doug North won a Nobel Prize in economics. One of his arguments is that because there was a labor shortage following the Black Death, and he sees that changing balance and the shortage of labor as one of the reasons why feudalism ultimately ends up disappearing.
More recently, the Spanish flu of 1918 swept through the ranks of both sides of World War I, but its devastating impact on the already weakened German army accelerated the end of the war and Germany's humiliating defeat, setting the stage for a 20th century filled with conflict. Those who support democracy aren't taking this lying down. Young people in Hong Kong have been protesting for well over a year now and show no signs of stopping despite the pandemic. People from all over Belarusian society have risen up to demand an electoral recount, even in the face of violence from the police. In Brazil and the Philippines, the strong Supreme Courts have so far held up as checks on their country's leaders. For now, it seems that many democracies, both old and young, will have to prove that they can withstand a public health crisis while maintaining their democratic values. A challenge that may prove even more difficult if a dreaded second wave hits the world this fall or winter.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.